Holy smokes, guys. Look at this headline coming out of Bloomberg. Canada takes over U.S. trade crown as $37 trillion. Debt crushes Washington. This is not a headline that we anticipated at all. But there's some incredible developments unfolding in Washington right now. It's almost like we're seeing the complete opposite of what the powers that be want us to see. And it seems like they're doing everything they can to try to hide it. In fact, we actually got an email from our host saying, hey, I don't know if you saw this, but Canada is the no one trading partner with the United States. And I was like, what? That's impossible. There's no way. Let me go check this out. So that's why we're bringing this story to you today. It's just so unexpected. But let's dive into this article together, because there's a lot of juicy details here that nobody else is talking about. Now, if you haven't been following our show for a while now, then let me explain something to you real quick. You see, one of the biggest scams being perpetrated on the American people right now is that the United States is broke. Now, according to our government, they claim that the national debt is over $31 trillion. They say that the country is going bankrupt, and they say that we need to take drastic action before it's too late. Otherwise, we'll have runaway inflation, hyperinflation, Zimbabwe style, except we're not Zimbabwe. We're the United States of America. So how could that possibly happen? Well, this article shows you why it won't happen. The reason they keep telling us that the sky is green or the grass is blue is because they want us to believe that the only way to save the country is by giving them more power. And once they have that power, they're never going to relinquish it. And this is exactly why we should start questioning everything that they tell us, because if they lied about one thing, chances are they're lying about everything. So let's look at this article together and see what they don't want you to know. The first thing you should know, as this article opens up, is that the United States has been the world's largest economy for decades, if not centuries. However, this is changing. This year, the United States will no longer be the top trading partner with Canada. According to Bloomberg, the U.S. will fall behind Canada. In other words, America will no longer be Canada's top trading partner. Why is this happening? What's going on here? Let's find out. Canada took the North America No. 1 spot after surpassing the U.S. as its largest trading partner in 2021. And now, the Great White North is set to retain its position in 2022 as well. If you were like me, you probably never even thought about this being possible. You didn't think Canada was even capable of competing with the United States? But apparently, this is happening. And you might be asking yourself, what caused this? What happened here? Well, two simple answers. First, the Canadian economy grew faster than the U.S. economy during the pandemic. Now, that's not entirely accurate, because the U.S. economy grew by 5.7% in 2021, while the Canadian economy grew by 4.8%. So the U.S. economy did grow faster than the Canadian economy. But when you consider the size of each respective economy, it changes things. The U.S. economy is valued at around $23 trillion, while the Canadian economy is valued at around $2 trillion. So obviously, the U.S. economy is much larger than the Canadian economy. However, because the U.S. economy is so large, it was only able to grow by 5.7%, while the Canadian economy had to shrink by 5.4% in 2022, overcome that massive difference. In other words, the growth in the Canadian economy was proportionally larger than the growth in the U.S. economy, which allowed Canada to close the gap. Second, the U.S. economy faces significant headwinds that are likely to slow down its recovery, including supply chain bottlenecks, inflation, and rising interest rates. In other words, the U.S. economy is facing significant headwinds that are likely to slow down its growth. And this is the primary reason why the U.S. economy will no longer be Canada's largest trading partner. In other words, guys, the U.S. government is lying to us about how bad our economy is. Now, I know that's a bold statement, but let me show you what I mean. When you look at the data, it's clear that the U.S. economy is actually growing faster than the Canadian economy, as we just discussed. So why are they lying to us about how bad our economy is? Well, because they need our permission to implement policies that would give them more power. And they can't get that permission if they don't lie to us. This is why I'm so adamant about showing you the truth. It's not enough to simply report the news. We have to dig deeper and expose the lies that are being perpetuated on an unsuspecting public. If you want to live in a free country, then you need to know the truth. And the only way to do that is by supporting independent media outlets like this one. Now, let's continue on with this article. After all, this is a finance show, not a political show. The shift in fortunes reflects a starkly different economic reality. While the U.S. grapples with surging prices and wariness of a recession, Trudeau's Liberals are touting the lowest unemployment rate in almost a half-century and higher living standards for ordinary Canadians. Now, I know we just talked about how Canada's economy grew faster than the U.S. economy. But they're now saying that the U.S. economy is struggling with soaring prices and worries of a recession. They're saying that Justin Trudeau's Liberal government is doing great. Now, what does that mean for the average Canadian? Well, let's find out. While Americans wrestle with the highest inflation in 4 decades and rising interest rates, Canada's jobless rate fell to a new low in May, and wages for rank-and-file workers increased at the fastest pace on record. An average hourly wages rose 5.4% in May from a year earlier. The biggest gain since comparable records were kept starting in 2002. A separate report showed the average Canadian worker saw a 6.8% increase in wages. This is amazing news, guys. If the United States wants to regain its title as the world's top economy, then we need to follow Canada's lead. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but let me explain what I mean. The United States is the world's largest economy by a wide margin. However, the U.S. economy is much larger than the Canadian economy. So how can the U.S. become the world's top economy again? By making the U.S. economy more efficient. When you look at the U.S. economy, it's clear that we're wasting a lot of resources. The United States produces a lot of goods and services that are not needed or wanted. For example, the United States produces a lot of weapons and military equipment that are not needed or wanted. The United States also produces a lot of financial services that are not needed or wanted. These are just 2 examples of how the United States is wasting a lot of resources. Canada, on the other hand, is much more efficient. When you look at the Canadian economy, it's clear that they're only producing goods and services that are needed or wanted. For example, Canada is a major producer of oil and gas, but they don't produce any weapons or military equipment. This allows Canada to use its resources much more efficiently. If the United States wants to regain its title as the world's top economy, then we need to learn from Canada. We need to stop wasting so many resources on things that are not needed or wanted, and focus on producing things that are actually needed and wanted. Of course, this will never happen because the powers that be profit from the chaos. So, they will never allow the United States to become more efficient. But if you want to see the United States become the world's top economy again, then this is what needs to happen. And that's a quick breakdown of what's really going on. Of course, they're not going to let this last, so they will never allow the United States to become more efficient. But if you want to see the United States become the world's top economy again, then this is what needs to happen. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you liked this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I will see you back here tomorrow.